All right. Well, welcome. This is In the Aftermath of Suicide. I'm Phillip. This is my wife, Terry. And our hope, our goal today in this breakout is just to kind of maybe give you some practical tips or just talk through some of the things for us, the aftermath of suicide and caring for people who are survivors of suicide loss is not theory for us. We've been on both sides of this. Certainly with the loss of our son, we are suicide loss survivors, and we've been on the receiving end of care and people walking with us, but also as a pastor and as the founder of Overflow Foundation, we've been on the side of caring for individuals, family members, loved ones of those who have lost someone to suicide. So it's interesting, I was thinking about this the other day. In the year before Philip's death, I officiated, I think, 3 suicide funerals in that year. And since Philip's death, which was 3 years ago, I've officiated 6 funerals for suicides. 3 connected within the church congregation, 3 just people out in the community that didn't have a church. And so we've been on both sides of that. And so we just want to share just a little bit and really want to leave a lot of time for question and answer. I think one of the things that may be helpful to understand if you are a survivor of suicide loss or you care for and walk with somebody who's lost a loved one to suicide is that it is truly the pinnacle of grief. If you think of grief like a pyramid, at the bottom would be, the 82-year-old grandmother who passed away after a long, full life. But as you move up to the deeper, more complicated grief, at the top of that pinnacle, that pyramid of grief, is the loss of a child or a spouse in early years, at a young age. And then on top of that is to lose that loved one to either suicide or murder. And suicide in particularly because it has unanswerable questions. You cannot rationalize, it would be horrible to lose a child or a spouse in a car accident, but you could at least in your mind, somebody ran a red light. There's some way to understand it. With suicide, there's not. And the only person to blame is the person you're grieving, losing. So it is complicated grief. It's very complicated grief. And so just understanding that at the outset, it's not just grief. It's complicated grief. Interestingly, as a pastor who is officiated funerals or walked with families who've lost someone to suicide, what would you guess is the number one question they either want to ask me or actually ask me about their loved one who died by suicide? Any guesses?
Heaven or hell.
Yes, heaven or hell. Whether they verbalize it or not, that question is in their mind. And I understand it because having been a pastor for 30 years, clearly understanding the truth of the gospel, that salvation is in Christ alone, through faith alone, it's not based on our performance, knew that, and knowing my son had a vibrant relationship and a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Even with all that information, that question just kind of flowed through my mind. Where is he? And I understand where that question comes from. There are people, have been historically, this idea that suicide is an unpardonable or unforgivable sin. And it's built on this idea that you're not able to confess it and receive repentance or forgiveness for it, right? And so when I have conversations with people that believe that way or feel that way, I'm like, well, if that is your deeply held belief, don't break the speed limit. Because if you have a car crash and you're breaking the speed limit or you run a stop sign, you break the law, that's a sin. You're going to die without confessing that. So, for me, from a gospel standpoint, it doesn't make sense. But for some people, it does. And what I say to them, if they know someone or ever talk to someone, if that is a deeply held belief of yours, would you just keep it to yourself? Yes. It's not helpful. In fact, most people who feel like they need to tell somebody that or get that out, They're doing that because of what it means to them, not what is helpful for the person. I'll give you a quick story. A friend of mine, a pastor in this community, my friend Chris, his mother in her late 60s died by suicide. And he shared the eulogy at her funeral. And he shared about her life and his memories and all of that. And at the end, he talked about, as broken and as hurting as he was, he found hope in knowing that he would see her again and that she would be whole and healed, and her battle with depression was no longer hers to fight. After that service, he's walking through the funeral home, the people that were there. Somebody in that crowd felt like they needed to go up to him, and they basically walked up to him and just said, "You just told a lie. Your mother is in hell because she committed suicide." And I thought, why would, that was about somebody trying to do something for themselves, right? And so I would just say that's a question that people are going to have, whether they verbalize it or not. So I think it's important to understand that. When I think in terms of ministering to or walking with or even officiating the funeral for someone, a loved one who's lost a loved one to suicide, I would say this: the deeper the grief, the fewer the words. The deeper the grief, the fewer the words. We feel this need to say things, to try to, we're doing it out of a desire to help them feel better, or maybe even help ourselves feel better. But when it comes to this kind of catastrophic, complicated grief, I don't mean to be crass, but it's as simple as this. The best way to care for them: show up and shut up. They don't need Platt spiritual language. They don't need, even things that are true in the aftermath of suicide are not necessarily, when you're in that kind of shock, they're not helpful. Yeah. These Platt things, whatever you would call them, these little platitudes. So just show up and shut up. Just be there. I don't remember anything anybody said to me from the moment I got the phone call that Phillip was gone. I don't remember anything said at the funeral. I don't remember anything anybody said except one really hurtful thing when we were doing the receiving line or whatever that was, when we stood down there and people came through. I don't remember anything anybody said, but I remember who was there. I remember who cried. I remember who came and sat on our back porch. I remember who was. The ministry of presence is very powerful in these kinds of situations. If you are a pastor, we got pastors in here? Great. So from just as terms of officiating the funeral and some of that stuff, here's a couple things I would say. First, you need to let the family take the lead in whether or not they want to go public with the way their loved one died, right? Not everybody's going to feel like we feel that, what do we have to hide? We're not ashamed. But let them take the lead. If you're walking with someone and maybe their loved one died by suicide, but it's not publicly known, that's not your story to tell, right? You're not being helpful. So I will tell you some of the things that have been helpful that were shared. Another pastor and his wife were very helpful. They had lost their son to suicide about 5 years earlier. They shared some things. Some other people that God has brought into our life shared some things. And I've shared these with families now. One of them is to help them recognize that they did what they knew to do when they knew to do it. Because Terry will talk a little bit about the woulda, shoulda, couldas, but that is something that has resonated with us from the moment it was said. The other thing, and I typically share this as a part of the service, if you're a pastor, or just as a friend or a family member, is this idea that a person's life story is not defined by the final word on the final page of the final chapter. Their life is defined by every word on every page of every chapter. And that's so important for them to know that and to be reminded of that. Because I can tell you we're 3 years, a little over 3 years. We are just now getting to a place where when we think about Phillip, we are starting to think about how he lived and not just how he died. The trauma of suicide it's like this. It's all you can see. It's like right here. It's taken 3 years to be able to think about Phillip as a kid playing Little League ball. right? The trauma leading up to his death, the trauma in the aftermath of his death, very difficult to see anything but how he died. And so just reminding them that this doesn't define them. It doesn't define their memory, right? So I think that's very important. So it's a shock to get this call or to have this kind of loss. So Terry's going to share a little bit about that.
So one of the hardest things to deal with is the absolute shock and trauma of getting that call that you have a loved one or a friend or someone that you knew that has died by suicide. I lost both of my parents as a teenager in a car accident, and I agree with Phillip. It was not easy. It was still heartbreaking, but I could reason through that in my mind and understand that a car ran a stop sign, and I could even go through the physical injuries as a nurse that my parents had and reason why they did not survive that. And so that became a way that I was able to deal with my grief after that loss. But with the loss of Phillip Jr., I could see a table in front of me covered with dominoes. And I went through this mentality or thought process almost every single day for quite a while. If I had moved this domino, or if this domino had not been there, and then we pushed the dominoes, would we have gotten a different outcome? Well, how about this domino over here? What if that one hadn't been there? And so one of the most difficult things to deal with as the survivor of suicide loss are the coulda, shoulda, wouldas of what happened. And so as a way for me to combat that in my own grief, and for other people, if you are survivors in this room, or if you're helping someone walk on this journey of grief after suicide, is to make a list and focus on the things that you know you did do. Because there are things that you can put on that list. Okay? There are things that you can put on that list. And I believe that Satan would have us focus on the negativity and really focus on the things that we feel like, well, I should have done that. I could have done that. Well, what if we had done this instead of that? To keep us mired down in guilt and shame and discouragement over the loss of our son. And if we stay there in that guilt and discouragement and just that yuck of this loss, are we moving forward to be able to host a conference like this? Are we moving forward asking God to have purpose in our pain and to be able to help other people who are struggling? We're not. And so I make an active choice now to list the things and focus on the things that I know that we did for Phillip. And yeah, were we perfect parents? Absolutely not. Our family has all issues and stuff just like every other family. And parenting 5 teenagers is hard. It was really, really hard. But there were a lot of things we did right too. And so to focus on those things is helpful in the grieving process. The other thing in the guilt and the shock and feeling the fault and that weight of suicide is just helping the family make a simple, practical list of any needs that they have. You know, in shock and disbelief, especially in those first couple of days and weeks, I found it very difficult to even function. I think for several days, I didn't even come out of my room. It was difficult for me to move at all in my grief. And so, you know, you think about going to the grocery store or to the post office or paying bills. Next week it's the bill cycle, and life continues even though the life of our son, we're grieving the loss of our son. And so if you're close to the family or someone who is grieving like this, make a list of those simple things that can be done. Starting a meal train. Do you need anything from the grocery? Are there medications you need picked up from the doctor or from the pharmacy? Can I help you in calling your doctor? Are there prescriptions you're out of? Maybe they're on blood pressure medicine and because their health at that point is in crisis too. So helping them continue with their self-care in the midst of all of this grief is very important. So just helping them make very short, practical list of things that they could have help with over the next couple of weeks. Does their grass need to be cut? Do they have small children, or are there errands that could be run that they're just would be the farthest thing from their mind at the time? So get really, really practical with the things that you make a list on to assist families who are grieving in this way.
Yeah, and depending how close you are to them, if you're a little outside the rung, you just showing up doing something might not be helpful. But if you're close enough to them and you just see a need, just meet that need. You don't need to, somebody cut our grass. Somebody put food in the refrigerator. I have no idea who it was, because we were literally, I might have seen them cutting the grass, but I don't. You're in shock and trauma. And so, doing that. I think the other thing to think about, either if you are a suicide loss survivor or you are walking with a suicide loss survivor, is this question of, when do I need to do more? Are they getting in trouble here? Are they spiraling down? Or are they in a healthy place? How can I determine that? And so just a couple things of, going beyond just the church helping or friends or family helping. One of the things I strongly recommend for any survivor of suicide loss is professional counseling, and particularly if there is a grief specialist available. It is complicated grief. Now, this is not the week after the funeral, but within a few months, I would say, we, along with some of our children, we were actually doing counseling because leading up to Phillip's time in rehab and then his time home in a really good place and then his death, that was a 2-year traumatic experience, watching his life become unmanageable, trying to get him help. So we were already in counseling, but we picked that up pretty soon after his death and really encouraged his adult siblings to do that as well. And talking about siblings, it's just a little side note. Siblings of suicide loss survivors are often called the forgotten mourners. Because, and I can tell you, my adult children, they will tell you, everybody they saw from the church, from the community, they would say, "How's your mom and dad?" But they would never say, "How are you?" So just make a mental note or a note of that. If there are siblings involved, they are often forgotten, or they feel like they need to step in and help mom and dad and be strong. And so I strongly recommend professional counseling. Certainly for me, I would recommend pastoral Christian counseling. Professional pastoral Christian counseling would be excellent, but any professional counseling would be super helpful. There are survivor of suicide loss support groups. They're available in most every community. I will tell you, timing is a big deal, at least from us. We went to a survivor support group 3 months?
2 months.
2 months after Phillip's death. Way too early. It turned out to be not helpful, maybe even hurtful. We just weren't ready. We now are a part of a survivor of suicide loss group, and it is very helpful. But it was 2 years before we were ready for that. Different people, we have some people in our support group that are weeks, just a couple of weeks or months. It just depends. So just let them know to try it if they want. If it doesn't work, then don't throw that baby out with the bathwater. Maybe come back at a later time, because it is, as hard as a circle to sit in as that is for us, it is the one place in our world and in our relationships where we don't have to explain things. Yeah. There is a level of understanding that other people can't have. And there's something about them. They don't have to say it. We don't have to explain it. They get it. And that's super helpful and been a real blessing to us. And so those are just some of the things. Here's what I would recommend. It's called support mapping. Support mapping. What I'm talking about is to help that survivor of suicide loss literally map out where are the support people and support structures in the different areas of their life? For example, within their family, not everybody in the family is a helpful, safe person to be with, right? So it's just like the general population. Some people are helpful. So, but is there one or two safe people that are within your family structure that you can talk to, that you can open up, that you can call or go see or go, I'm having a bad day today? Do that same with where you work. You know, your work environment. Because I tell you, I'm 3 years out. There are still days for, sometimes there's something that triggers it, a smell or a song or something. But sometimes these waves of grief come over me, as Forrest Gump would say, for no particular reason at all. I'm sitting there working on it's a message on joy or something, you know, and I'm working away, and all of a sudden, like a rogue wind, bang, it just knocks me down, and I can't function. But there are people on my staff that I know I can go to and say, I'm going home. I can't function today. And they just take care of it. They're safe people. Or maybe I just talk it out with them or cry it out with them. And maybe I can go back in the office, you know, an hour later. So where's your support people and structure in your work environment? In your community, your neighborhood. Are there some neighbors who are helpful and supportive? So have them map that out. Just write. There's something about putting it down on a sheet of paper, because you step back and you go, you know, I'm not as alone as I feel I am. You know, that God has provided some things, and I can look at it. So that's a real encouragement that I think would be helpful.
One of the things also that we have to talk about associated with suicide is the stigma associated with even just the word suicide. And the mention of mental illness, anything associated with mental health, people have a tendency to want to go the other way, or to say this is taboo, we shouldn't be talking about this, those are skeletons in the closet, we don't necessarily want to talk about this family history of bipolar or schizophrenia or alcohol use. And so that's really one of the reasons we're having this conference today, to help normalize these conversations surrounding suicide and surrounding mental health. So punching our fist through the wall of that stigma is very important. Words are very important when we start talking about mental health. Steering away from words like crazy or cray-cray or off their rocker or a couple of cards shy of a full deck kind of thing. Any of these negative descriptors that the culture that we've had a tendency to use in the past describing someone who may be struggling with some aspect of their mental health is stuff that we have to steer away from. Again, because that stigma causes individuals to not want to raise their hand and say, I'm not okay and I need help. And our goal is to help them understand that it's okay to be struggling. And it's okay to say, I don't know what's wrong, but I know something's wrong, and I know I need to get some help. And so we want to decrease that stigma. Sometimes it helps people to share their story. If they've lost someone to suicide, it may be very helpful for people to eventually share that story. It's helpful to me and obviously for our family to do things like this and to feel like that there is purpose in our pain. And that God is using this to help move these conversations forward so other people will get help. And so individuals may want to share their story if they have suffered a suicide loss. Other individuals may not. That's a very individualized thing. But cracking that door and asking someone if they would like to talk about it can be a very helpful thing as well. I have a good friend here in town who also lost a son. And we're two polar opposites on this subject. She doesn't want to talk about it at all. She has her circle of friends that help her in her grief process, and that is how she wants to deal with it, and that's fine. There's nothing better about either scenario. It's just very personal. And so just know that there can be either of those scenarios. The other thing I would say is remember that saying the word suicide with the family or asking someone if they're having thoughts of suicide does not increase the risk. Okay, a lot of people will steer away from it because they're afraid that if I mention this, then I've planted the seed in their mind, and then they're actually at greater risk if you don't ask. It lowers the risk when you do ask because they feel like, thank goodness someone has actually observed my pain, they've noticed my pain, and now maybe it's okay if I do crack that door and talk about it a little bit. So don't be afraid to say, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Know that once it has occurred in a family, that increases the risk of a repeat. And so that's just something that we have to be mindful of in our family, and something that other individuals who are walking in this suicide ministry or the care of individuals of loss need to know that there is a chance of repeat. And so being aware of that and cognizant of that decreases risk, because we're increasing our knowledge base of this and how to handle things like that. And so, we wouldn't see somebody coming down the road that has colon cancer or that has cancer of some sort and say, hey, here comes that tumor. Would we? And so nor are we going to say, there comes that crazy man that hangs out at the post office. Have you seen him at the post office? That kind of thing. So we want to be mindful and respectful of individuals in that way, and especially after a suicide loss. We want to be careful with the way that we dialogue with the family, not trying to cover up or anything. You just want to be mindful of the pain of the situation and careful of the words that you use as you dialogue about the situation that's occurred.
And once, as Terry said, once suicide occurs in a family, it increases the risk within that family. So if you're a loss survivor or you're walking with a loss survivor, being aware of that and just looking for potential warning signs, beginning to isolate and withdraw, maybe posting things on Facebook that you're not a direct, I want to die, but if you read something that somebody that you know posts on Facebook and it causes you to go, don't ignore that feeling. Respond. Don't respond on Facebook. Don't put it in the comments. Pick up the phone and call them. Pursue them till you can hear their voice. Don't assume it's just a bad day. That they're right. Or if you're in a conversation with somebody and they say something and it causes you to, that little thing in there, could very well be the Holy Spirit telling you that's a cry for help. It's not direct, but just listen for those. And you could be way off base. That's okay. That's better. They would at least know you care enough, right, that you're willing to follow up with them. Another thing to kind of watch for that is a warning sign is giving away valuable things. We had no idea. 2 months before Phillip's suicide, he was doing a show, and he had released his own CD with his EP, whatever they call it now, of his own original music. And so it was streaming online, but he had like 2,000 discs, and he would put them on a table at the back of his show, and people would buy them, and that's one of the ways he helped pay his bills. But that next to last show, I guess it was the last show that we were there for, they were on the table for free. He was giving them away. And we didn't think about that. We're like, why are you giving those away? You need money. You got bills to pay. He's like, he just kind of, poo-pooed it off. And so we didn't really think about that. I don't know if that was what he was doing. But I do know giving away valuables is a warning sign. I think the other thing to watch for is either starting to use or an increased use of alcohol and drugs. If their grief is they're stuck in their grief and they're not feeling like they're moving forward, they may be trying to medicate that grief away. And alcohol and drugs greatly increases the risk of suicide across the board, not just for survivors, but for anybody. So that's a warning sign to look at. And then I think one of the greatest gifts you can give to anybody in your life is to be a non-judgmental listener.
So one of the things that Overflow Foundation does is teach a course that's called Mental Health First Aid. And part of the Mental Health First Aid class is learning 5 steps to the action plan that we can use in approaching someone or having a conversation with someone who may be struggling with an aspect of their mental health, or who may be using substances to cope, or in a substance use disorder. And one of those most important steps to me and that hit very close to home for me was non-judgmental listening. Learning how to indicate to the person that we are an active listener, making eye contact, sitting maybe as opposed to hovering over if we're having a one-on-one conversation, being an appropriate distance from that person, not all up in their private space, but being appropriately close, appropriate touch if they've given permission or if you feel like that's appropriate to hold a hand or put your hand on their arm kind of thing are all appropriate things to do. Not multitasking by scrolling through your phone, that kind of thing is something that we see very prevalently now. And so multitasking is one of those things that we want to steer away from if we're trying to have important conversations with people and indicate that we are listening. One of the conversations that we had with one of the physicians that was discharging Phillip one day, he came in to give us a little bit of information and talk about discharge planning and all that kind of stuff. And as we were in the room with him, he was kind of turned sideways and he kept his hand on the doorknob the entire time during the conversation. And that did not give me a feeling that he had time or desire, or that he was really actively listening and caring about maybe what some of the questions were that we had. And so be aware of your posture in talking to people or in walking through this grief process with individuals as to whether or not they're getting the vibe that you are listening and that we really are present in that moment with them to be able to listen. Non-judgmental listening, it's not a easy task, especially for parents sometimes. And one of the things that we found too is when you are extremely emotionally attached to a situation and trying to navigate through that, having a person who is less emotionally attached to the situation that can help you navigate through things is very helpful. We had to get that before and after Philip's death to get input from individuals who were thinking straight and rationally at the time and were able to give us the input and the guidance that we needed at the time. So getting those third parties involved as we're walking this difficult journey is very important as well.
You know, when I think of non-judgmental listening, and I've learned so much about it since Philip's death, for me, my nature has always been kind of the vanilla ice philosophy. If there's a problem, I'll solve it. So rather than listening, about 2 sentences into it, okay, I understand your problem, here's what you need to do. If you just quit doing this, immediately, that's not helpful, right? They're not necessarily always looking for you to solve the problem. They're looking for somebody to listen carefully, take it in, not try to give them, well, if you didn't do this, that's what I think of non-judgmental listening. And maybe just asking questions of them. But like I said, I'll say this over and over again. Nearly impossible for a parent to do this with an adolescent or teenager, or even young adult child. You are so vested in them. And I don't care how strong your faith is. Fear is a factor. Those kinds of things, they almost overtake you. And you almost can't sit there because you can see the choices they're making. And so sometimes one of the best things you can do is there another safe, caring adult who could be that? Now, I can listen non-judgmentally to your kids all day long, right? But with mine, I'm like, yeah. I mean, I love your kids, but these are my kids. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So sometimes it may be finding that resource for them if you're struggling to be that non-judgmental listener. But it's huge because here's what we have realized. We're talking about making a list of the things you did do. You don't have to make a list of the things you didn't do or that you did wrong. It's with you all the time almost. So, but as I think back to kind of, we could see the what Philip was doing with his substance use and how his life was becoming unmatched. We could see the what, but I don't think we ever ask often enough and listen non-judgmentally enough to the why. Why? Why are you drinking at the level you're drinking? Why? Because the why is the source of the problem. The alcohol and drugs is a symptom of it, but it's hard to do that when you can see if you drink, if you drive, you're going to jail, you're going to kill somebody, you're going to die, It's very hard to do, but it's so important in that non-judgmental listening. So we each want to give you our top one thing. Like if there's one thing we'd want you to know about caring for those in the aftermath of suicide. And then we're going to open it up to Q&As. So here's my one thing. Be there for the long haul. This doesn't go away in a year, 5 years, 10 years. I just had a conversation at lunch with a lady who shared with me she lost her son to suicide 30 years ago. His name was Joseph. And she said, I have a lot more good days, but I'll never get over it. But I'm getting through it. And you can too. Right? I mean, it's 30 years. She's still, when I said his name, because Terry has helped me become a much better human being overall. So I asked what was his name, and when she said his name, tears came to her eyes. 30 years ago. Be there for the long haul. Don't expect them to get over it. Because I can tell you, the people in the outer circle, people they work with, people they go to church with, they want them to get over it because it makes them uncomfortable. Right? It makes us uncomfortable when somebody's not in a good place. Particularly this. You be the person that recognizes they're not going to get over it. And that's okay because they can get through it, stepping one at a time. So be there for the long haul.
And mine would be, you've already touched on it, is say their name. Don't be afraid to say their name and to keep their presence alive with that family or with those people that person was significant with. I remember we had a family gathering about 6 months after Phillip died, and so we were still very much in the throes of acute grief. And during that entire family gathering, not one person acknowledged what had happened, what we had been through, said Phillip's name, acknowledged anything about it. And that was more hurtful to me than to have dwelt on it and just talked about it the entire time we were there. And so saying the name, saying your son Phillip was such a special person, whatever you want to say that is appropriate, but continuing to acknowledge the fact that this person was significant and present and very real and important to that family is very, very important. So continue to say their name and as you remember that individual with the family.
Awesome. So we're going to open it up for questions just to set you at ease, because I know being around survivors of suicide loss, you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, especially when I threw people under the bus, told you things they said. So there's nothing you can ask that's going to make this hurt or make it more hard for us. In fact, if it's something you really want to know, you asking the question, and if we're able to help you, that helps us see purpose in our pain. So no holds barred, nothing's off limit. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that I've experienced, and I'm sure you guys have too, much more than I have, lost a couple family members to suicide, but it was not, one was a sister-in-law and the other one was a first cousin. But anyway, one of the things that I cannot imagine saying to either one of you, even now, is I feel your pain.
Yeah.
That's not possible.
No. I think what is a more helpful phrase is I'm sorry for your pain. Yeah, to say anybody. I won't even say this to a fellow suicide loss survivor. I won't ever say, I know what you feel and I know what you're going through. Yeah. I'll say, I walk this journey and I understand it's hard and I'm sorry for your pain. But that's a good point, Gail. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
As I'm sitting here listening, my husband and I are medical people. We've been involved with NAMI for 14 years teaching the family-to-family class. And one of the things that in fact, the question this morning was mine about our son saying, God created me in your womb. Why did he make me like this? And I think about, Satan really knows how to ruin almost everything except God's in control. I mean, what better way to destroy Christians than to affect their mind and to affect their children and You know, we're fighting against principalities and evil, and we can only continue to make it if we support each other and, you know, share our love of God.
Yeah. I want to add this, and I thank you for saying that. One of our counselors told us, because you do, try to almost put yourself into the mind and the body of that individual, and what was he thinking? Because we are such a close family. If you know us at all and our other children, we are just very transparent. Again, not perfect, but we are such a close family. And so for us to have had a son that got to that point that he detached from us was excruciatingly painful. But the counselor said he did not let go of y'all. He let go of the pain. And so that resonated with me. That resonated. And the counselor also said that unless you have experienced severe depression or one of these mental illnesses where suicidal thoughts is a part of that mental illness, we cannot fathom the pain and the darkness that those individuals are in at the time. And I think that it is excruciating emotional and mental anguish in that moment, and it is a moment of hopelessness that none of us can understand. And so that really, really helped me to hear the counselor say he was not letting go of y'all. And so,
you know, because these are the thoughts, like, how could he do this to us, right? He knew how much he meant to our family and how much he loved us, and we loved him, and he knew. He was smart. He had a bachelor's degree in psychology. He knew what this would do. And so we try to go into that, and how could he have done this? The anger that I struggle with, you know, with him, how could you do this? You know this would nearly kill your mother, all of that. But I'm trying to understand where he was with a fairly healthy mind, trying to understand how somebody whose mind won't mind. And unless you've been there, think about it this way. The strongest human instinct is survival. Right? I think about the hiker that cut his own arm off with a dull pocket knife just to live. That desire to live and survive is to overcome that obstacle. I know I can't get anywhere close to understanding that pain. And that has been helpful to me. It breaks my heart that my son was in that kind of pain. But it also allows me to go, yeah, I'm not angry with him because I can't understand. But he was in excruciating pain. And for some reason that has helped me work through my anger towards him. Still working on my anger towards God. There are still songs we sing on Sunday morning that are hard for me to sing. There's no, there's no wall you won't push down. There's no mountain you won't climb up coming after me. Where was his rescue? You know, I have these questions. I'm being real because there's no need to pretend. It's a struggle, and God's okay with me struggling with him. In fact, it keeps me close to him. And I don't want to serve the God of my understanding, right? If I understood God, he's not God, I am. But I do want to lean back in the arms of a Father that I don't always understand, but I know loves me and I know is good. And so that's a wrestling for me and for us in our spiritual journey. But it's helpful to understand you can't, if you have a fairly healthy mind, you can't understand the hell that is a person whose mind won't mind. That's why I believe mental illness is the most horrible disease and affliction, right? Cancer is horrible. I just went through some cancer surgery and stuff. But you know what I had to help me walk through that? The ability to think and reason and make choices about what I do and who I go to and where I get help. Imagine when your mind is sick. When you're probably the best tool you have to move in the right direction. When your mind won't mind, I don't even think any of us can fathom that. And so understanding that has helped us release some of the anger we have towards Phillip, for sure.
Could I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
We have a son who has bipolar 2 disorder who's attempted suicide 3 times, and he was not successful. But I just agonized all the time. You know, he'd go somewhere and he drank, and he would self-medicate other ways. And one day God just comforted me and said, in my heart, I thought, well, at least he'll be at peace if he does it. You know, I have done all I could. I've loved him. I've taken him to church. I've done everything that I ever thought was the right thing to do. And I just have to, I had this mental image of holding him. He and his twin sister were born 2.5 months early, and he only weighed like 3 pounds. I remember in my mind just having him in my arms. It's like I just rested in God's arms.
Yeah.
You know?
That's what you have to do, right? For all of our kids, for everybody, right?
Yeah.
That's part of that faith journey, for sure. Other questions? Yeah, we'll go here. Yes.
So you guys hit on a little bit of having other siblings.
Yeah.
I'm actually walking with a mom right now it's almost a year that she's experienced this. But I've noticed in our conversations, but I've never felt like I had a gentle way to bring up the fact she has 2 other sons, that it's almost like they don't exist at this point. Because this was her son, and now he's gone. And she can't really push past that. So 2-part question is, how can I gently remind her, yes, you lost a son, but we have to care for these guys. But then also even bringing up the subject, like you said, where now it may be more prominent in their family. Obviously, I don't want to just blurt that out. But so is there a way to just kind of gently encourage both of those pieces?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think I had to be, and I continue to have to be mindful of that, because as a mama, you feel that hole, you feel that missing piece of the puzzle, and so it's natural to focus on that. And so one of the things that we did was I don't know the ages of these kids. What are the ages? Teens. We provided space in our home and opportunities in our home to have family time and to have everybody in that space and to kind of crack the door and say, how are you? You know, is there anything we can do for you? Is there anything you want to talk about? And so just encouraging her to have that space with them and to have that real talk time, because with teenagers, it affects them in a totally different way. And with grief, with teenagers, they can look at it in little pockets of time. They're not able to look at a scenario like adults are. And so they do it in almost little snippets of time. But then they're on to something else. And it almost seems like it doesn't matter to them, or that they're taking it way differently. But it's not. It's just that they compartmentalize. They can do it in little compartments. And so we just provided time and opportunities to be intentional with our kids, and then encourage her to say, hey, and you can just do this in conversation almost. Say, hey, doesn't Tommy like to go to Sonic and get ice cream? Why don't we do that today? Wouldn't it be cool to, and maybe you suggest doing activities that you know those kids like. If you know enough about them to do that, then just make suggestions about, hey, why don't we get them out of the house and go and do whatever, and that may be helpful to her.
Yeah, and I would say too, you said about a year out, so a year is nothing in this grief. It feels like a long time, you know, if you're on the outside walking in. So I can tell you from September 6, 2018 to September 6, 2019, I don't remember much of anything. Right? Even though I might look on the outside like I'm doing these things, most of that year is a blur. So, I mean, this is bigger than cutting their grass, but this might be one of those things that the church or friends may need to step in and help with that with the kids. Think about it this way. Somebody's in ICU and they had a limb cut off in an accident. They had to have it reattached. Right? yes, at some point they need to go down to the physical therapy room and start doing those stairs and walking on it. But it takes some time, right? So a year, she may still be in the ICU. Probably the best thing, if she is able to get good help and good support for her journey, right? That she's a good mom, so she's gonna recognize that. But she's in shock. She got hit by a train she never saw coming. She's still trying to pick up the pieces and get through the day. So it may be something that you or others may have to carry that load a little bit and help her get the help she needs so that she can move back to that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Good. Yes, ma'am.
You talked a little bit about the funeral like itself.
Yeah.
You mentioned, when during your visitation period, someone saying something hurtful. At our church, we've also had that happen during a funeral. Living through it yourself, would you suggest not doing that at all?
Thank you for bringing that up. So I will just tell you this. The visitation thing was her idea.
They're brutal for any law.
Yeah.
I mean, is it... One of the things we suggested was, can they write a note and say,
it's going to be different. I'll just tell you our story. I thought the whole time, we will have a service because we do want to celebrate his life. And we have a church full of people. We've been here for 21 years. This is not just a church I work at. This is a family that our family, they've watched our kids grow up. We're going to grieve together as a church family and as a community. Because he had a whole group of people all over. And so we knew he was going to do a funeral. Terry said, we're going to do a visitation. I'm like, no, we're not. And we did. Yes, there were hurtful things said. But I can close my eyes and I can see that line. And I can see those people. And I won't let one person who just didn't know what else to say and said something, I'm not going to let that steal what that gave. But that was a personal choice for us. I don't think there's a right or wrong on that. But I can tell you it was more helpful than hurtful.
And it was not something done viciously or intentionally. It is an earnest attempt by the people there to say anything or do anything that would make this better, that would ease this pain, or that would comfort in some way. And so sometimes, and I've been guilty of this too before, sometimes when you're trying that hard to figure out, okay, what's the right thing to say, it's probably better not to say anything. And so I think that's a really individual choice as far as whether or not to do the visitation. I wouldn't discourage it or encourage it. I think the family needs to kind of walk through that and figure it out.
I will tell you in our support mapping, there were people that were on that support map who were right down there that could gently move people on, or, they're listening to that. So we had support in that. We weren't just down there by ourselves. Yeah. So that was helpful. Yeah.
I think one of the things both of you guys said, and I think, Terry, you said something about don't be afraid to say their name. Mm-hmm. And I think with my brother committed suicide in 2016, and I was with him the day he did, mm-hmm. and we knew he was going to, mm-hmm. and tried to pull out all the stops to keep him from doing it, and he still was successful. And I think one of the greatest parts of the healing process was actually the visitation. Mm-hmm. Because that's part of saying his name. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that I've come away with is don't ever forget to remember what we would love for everybody to remember. Yeah. And so that's tremendous. I mean, both of what you guys both said was just, I really appreciate it. It ministered my heart. Yeah. So thank you.
And you told me I don't know how long ago as we had dinner. Tell me your brother's name again.
Chuck.
Yeah. Thank you. For sure. Anybody else? Got a couple minutes left. All right. Thank you.
And they are going to play a video of Phillip, so if you get in there a couple of minutes early, you'll get to see one of his videos.
If you're in there for the last 4 or 5 minutes of the countdown, you'll get to here's video. See you.
Thank y'all for being a part.